So it's kind of rainy out today, so you get an office version of the video today, um, and that's okay. I like it when I come down here. I've got lots of reminders of God and walking together with God and just enjoying um, being around the scriptures and the books. I have a whole library here. So it's a relaxing place for me, a place where I can just kind of rest in the Lord, if you will, a place where I am at peace. So that's the question for you, for your icebreaker today. What helps you to be at peace? What helps you to be at peace? And why does this help? Why does it help you to be at peace? Talk about that with your group, and when you're ready to get started with the Bible study, you can press play. So this week we're continuing in our book of Colossians, the letter that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae, and as we're looking at this letter, we finished off last week with a passage that talks about clothing ourselves in certain things, and so Paul is making it perfectly clear in the letter that everything in our faith and our walk with God centers around Jesus. It doesn't have to do with our Jewish background or our Gentile background, the traditions that we used to have, or the traditions that have been created since then. It's about Jesus, and so he talks about then what we can do as people who believe in, who are thankful to, and who trust in Jesus. And he says to clothe ourselves, put on like clothing, clothe ourselves with certain things. This passage is for you to read. It's where we left off last week. We're going to pick up rereading this section because it's worth rereading this section, and it'll help us to understand the rest of what we do tonight or today, wherever you are with your group. It'll help you to understand the rest of the passage. So we're going to start with this. Start by reading this passage. What is it that Paul and that God is telling us to clothe ourselves in here? And then he finishes up by saying that this will let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. So how does clothing ourselves in these things give us peace, or help us to have the peace of Christ be in charge of or rule our hearts? So read that, talk about that with your group, and we will continue when you're ready. This next section of the book of Colossians is actually one that oftentimes gets misinterpreted, misunderstood, because we grab just a verse or a set of verses and we pull them and immediately start telling other people that they need to do them. They come in pairs. It starts out with husbands and wives, and then it talks about parents and children, or fathers and sons, fathers and children, parents and children, and then it talks about slaves and masters. And with each pair, Paul ends up telling them what to do in their day and age with their understandings of mother, father, and child, the understanding of husband and wife, and the understanding of slave and master in their culture of their day. These were a part of their culture. It was a very real part of their daily lives. And what Paul was talking to them about was how they can be Christ followers in any of these roles, in any of these situations. The problem is that when we read these and when we misinterpret them, What we usually do is we read them, we immediately end up looking at the other person's role. So I'm a man, I'm a husband. What I end up doing is I look at the wife, and it says what the wife is supposed to do, and it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And I immediately start telling my wife what she's supposed to do, that she's supposed to submit to me. Well, that's a misunderstanding of what Paul is doing here. Paul doesn't say, husbands, tell your wives to submit to you. That's not what he says. He says, wives, he's talking to the ladies, to tell them what they can do to walk with God, even if their husband is not walking with God, even if their husband is overbearing, even if their husband is says that he's walking with God, but he's really not, or has places where he's falling short. You see, if you go back to the beginning of this section and read it in context, that's the term that we're going to focus on this week, is reading the Bible in context. It means you don't just grab a verse or a sentence and pull it out and make it mean what you want it to mean. It means that you read the whole paragraph, the whole section, even the whole letter, so that you can understand better what the author is trying to say and what the author means when the author writes it down. What he's saying is that we can have compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, faithfulness. We can forgive people as the Lord has forgiven us. We can, over all these things, put on love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. We can let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. You can, even if your marriage is not the best marriage, you can, because of Jesus, have peace. That's what he's saying. So he tells wives, this is how you can have peace in your marriage. Husbands, this is how you can have peace in your marriage and show love to your wife. Parents, this is how you can have peace in your household and show love to your children. Children, this is how you can have peace and show love to your parents in your household. It is not intended for us to use as a battering ram against the other person in the relationship. It is intended to be an encouragement to us looking at ourselves, because between any two of us, there's only one of us that I can control, and that is me. And so I can have peace, I can love, I can forgive, I can have compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness. I can have all of these things in all of my relationships, no matter how good or bad the other person is in my relationships. The reason I say that is that we have the context of this letter, but we also have other letters that are written by Paul that fill out some of these concepts a little bit further. One of the letters that he wrote was to a church in Corinth. His first letter to the Corinthians is this letter that we have here. And I put a quote in there from there where he's talking about slaves and masters. You see, I've heard these passages misused to say that somehow God and the Apostle Paul approves of and even institutes slavery. And that is not true. That is not at all what Paul is saying, and that is not at all what God is saying. And we only have to turn to another passage here in Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians, to see that what Paul is actually saying is that if you are stuck in the institution of slavery as a slave, you can still walk together with God, you can still love your master, and you can have peace. So I put that other passage in there so that you can see Paul immediately says, don't be disheartened because you are a slave and you are stuck as a slave. Don't let that get you down. If you can get your freedom, do it. Get out of slavery. But if you can't and you're stuck there, don't feel bad about that. God is with you, and you can, in that relationship, walk together with God. Uh, like I said, we tend to turn it around and we make it say something that it's really not saying. What it's telling us is to reverse it. Don't look at the other person and tell them what to do. Look at yourself and see what God is offering to you in all of your relationships. So the question after you read this is simply that: how do these passages change if we reverse the way that we look at them? If we don't look at it as how can I tell somebody else what to do, and instead I look at it as how can I have peace? How can I love in all circumstances? How does that change the meaning of the passage? And how does it help you to find peace in all circumstances? Talk about that, and we will continue when you're done with this discussion. When you read this last section, you start to find out where Paul is going with all of this. You see, his main focus is clearly sharing the good news of the gospel wherever he goes. You see this not only in his teaching, but you see it in his life as well. You find out that Paul gets thrown in prison like he is right now, and he gets shackled to a guard so that the guard is right there chained to Paul, and that way Paul cannot escape. Paul doesn't see that as, oh, woe is me, I can't escape. He sees it as an opportunity to share the good news of the gospel with a captive audience. Hey, you got a guard right here. Might as well talk to him about Jesus. Paul is always looking for an opportunity to talk to somebody new about Jesus, to help them to come to God through Jesus and to walk together with God. And so he's encouraging the church in the same way. He's showing them that if you are married, that you have an opportunity to bring Christ into your marriage. If you have children, you have an opportunity to bring Christ to your children. If you live with your parents, you have an opportunity to bring Christ to your parents. If you are a slave, you have an opportunity to bring Christ to your master. If you are a master, you have an opportunity to bring Christ to your slave. You see, all of these relationships are an opportunity to share Jesus with someone else. That's the way Paul sees this, and that is what he is communicating in this letter to the church in Colossae. And so he tells them in all of these different relationships, don't leave the relationship, don't fight the relationship, don't get angry. Clothe yourself in things like compassion, kindness, humility, and gentleness. Forgive, love, have the peace of Christ in your heart. See, and what will happen is that the other people in our relationships will see something different in us, and they will ask us about that something different. Why are you being so kind to me? Why are you being so encouraging to me? Why are you're paying attention and listening to me? You never used to do that. They'll end up asking those why kinds of questions, and then it gives us the opportunity to tell them why. We can tell them about Jesus. That's what this last section of Paul's letter is about. This section that we're going to be doing here to finish up our time together. And so read that section where Paul talks about his desire to share Jesus with others, and also encourages us as his letter readers. He encourages us to have wisdom as we share Jesus with others as well. Read the passage, and then I just want you to talk about this a little bit. Paul is saying that when we love people, we become a visible expression of the love that God has for us. So, are you being that? Are you being a visible expression of God's love to the people in your life, the relationships in your life? And do they know that the reason that you are being loving is Jesus? Do they know that it is God who first loved you, and because of that, you love others as well? Talk about that in your group as you finish up. Pray for one another that we will all be a visible expression of God's love. Know that I'm praying for you as well, and I ask you to pray for me, that we will all live this out so well that people will see God and be drawn to God through us.